The goal of this podcast is to help you break in and thrive in advertising. And we do that every week by sharing the stories and advice of those rocking it. On the other side, we also have our quarterly Crowbar Awards. You can win a crowbar and potentially break into advertising by checking out www.crowbarawards.com. Now, I think this might be one of the most candid interviews I've ever conducted. Shareina Chandler is a copywriter at Wieden+Kennedy living over in Portland, Oregon. Shareina shares so much this episode. I might not do the interview justice by trying to fit the entire overview in a couple of minutes, but here's what you can expect to learn about. You will learn persistence. Shareina shares how she worked at a multitude of failed startups, and she moved back and forth from the UK to various states in the US, finally deciding to pursue a portfolio school option in Minneapolis. And you'll learn that this industry needs work. She shares that she had to learn to write white and covers her perspective and experiences as a Black copywriter in this industry. You will learn that even at the best, quote unquote, best shops, we can still find ourselves feeling that imposter syndrome bias and with other issues. But I love how Shareina rekindled her love for creating meaningful advertising and how she shared how she got there. I also got really excited as she mentioned her podcast that she founded and how that helped her break into advertising, just like my story. And hey, you're going to want to connect with Shareina. And to do that, listen to the end of this episode. And she also listed out resources just for you on our Instagram. Those are a secret. You got to go there. That's at Breaking and Entering Pod. All one word, at Breaking and Entering Pod. Now on with the show. This is the Breaking and Entering Advertising Podcast, and as usual, I'm your accomplice, Gino Schellenberger. Kick it, Mikey. Shareina Chandler, welcome to the Breaking and Entering Advertising Podcast. How are you doing today?
Hello. I am doing really, really good. Happy to be here.
I'm happy to have you on. I'm happy to have you on to talk about advertising. Did you ever talk about advertising in your life?
I used to have an advertising podcast, so I've talked about it on air a lot. But it's been a couple years since I've been in the booth, so excited to be here.
You used to have an advertising podcast. So what was that?
I did. It used to be called, well, I mean, it's still called that. I just don't have it. Borrowed interest.
What is it called?
Borrowed interest, like the phrase, it's borrowed interest.
I hear you. Gotcha.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Are you still doing that?
No. So this was like back when I was an intern. I had a podcast about advertising, about being a Black woman in advertising. And it was me, my friend Leah, who's an art director. At the time, she was at Fallon. Now she's freelance. And then our other friend, Amalia Nicholson, who's a producer. I think now she's at an agency in LA. So.
Well, I'm sure people could still go listen to some of those episodes. Are they still relevant, you think?
I think so. I haven't listened to it in a really long time. I had another podcast after that. So I've had a lot of podcasts.
You got the itch.
Life. Yeah.
Was the other one an advertising podcast as well?
No, but I started it with two friends who I met in advertising, and that one was about lies, because me and my co-host, we both tell a lot of like white lies, and so the podcast was called Bag of Lies, and it was all about the like little lies that we tell, and we started it because we both were out to coffee, and she was like, oh my goodness, I lied to the lady who was doing my coffee stuff. And I was like, oh, you lied? And she was like, yeah, like I have a coffee name. Her name's Malika and her coffee name is Emma. And it was really funny, and I'd never heard of that before. And I was like, oh my goodness, why'd you lie? And she was like, oh, that's just like my coffee name. I was like, oh, that's cool. Yeah. I at the time, I used to tell Uber drivers that I was divorced, even though I'd never been married. And so that was like my lie that I would tell a lot. And so then we just like started a podcast where we just like talked about all the lies we told.
Okay. Okay.
So
I will let people explore that, and hopefully we don't lie too much on this podcast. I like to lie sometimes, but I try to keep it pretty straight on this podcast. I have nothing to really lie about in my life, but I might start. So thanks for the influence.
That's okay. I'm
S-
always here.
So, Sharina, we're here to talk about you and advertising, and you are a copywriter at Wieden+Kennedy over in Portland, Oregon. Is that correct?
That is correct. I am those things.
That is a big deal. I think that's a name that's going to automatically draw attention. I think you're going to get more listeners just because of you and how great you are, but also the name itself is an agency a lot of people want to work for one day. So we have to address that. We're going to talk about what it's like working at Wyden. We're going to talk about how you broke into advertising, maybe some creative side hustles, starting a lying podcast, and your career. And then
Yeah.
looking back, all the advice that you wish you would have had as you were just entering and maybe first starting up in advertising. So, where do you want to start? I think let's talk about you, high level, who you are and where you're living and how's life.
Well, I'm Shareina. As you mentioned, I live in Portland. Life is pretty good right now. It's getting warmer, and I'm about to go on vacation. So
Yeah, you're feeling
that's
good.
yeah. I'm
Where are you
actually
going?
really pumped. I'm going camping, so that's the best part of living in Oregon, being outside. So I'm pumped about that. But yeah, no. My career.
Mhm.
I can start from the top. Would that be helpful?
Let's start where you're at right now.
I am at Wieden+Kennedy, and it is wonderful. I have been here 2 years now, and I started out on the Visa team. Like Visa, technically they're not a card company, but Visa that is on cards.
Okay.
So I started out on the Visa team. So my first couple of projects at Wyden were on Visa, and then from there I've just kind of been like working on whatever. Been on a bunch of pitches. I did a Old Spice campaign last year, and yeah, since then I've just kind of been just working on a bunch of random stuff.
Okay. I hear you. Do you have a creative partner?
I have a bunch of creative partners because one of the best parts of working at Wyden is that they don't make you stick to one person. And so I have my hoes in different area codes.
There you go. Shout out.
Yeah, and a handful of wonderful people who I work with. And yeah, I think that's been really, really great. I've worked at a lot of places where you kind of have to have the one person and you're married. And it's super, super nice to just like kind of bounce around and work with different people and enjoy different working styles based on the project.
Makes sense. I see arguments for both, right? One end, you can create a meaningful relationship that you get each other, you bounce ideas, you can get in the flow quicker, probably for efficiency. But then again, we're talking creative and creativity. It makes sense when you're working with different perspectives and bouncing around with different partners, not in the romantic sense, of course, because that would be bad. Well, we do not encourage that in the show. But yes, totally for the creative duo bouncing around and trying new partners out. That definitely makes sense. And I don't think I hear that too often. Maybe I do. Maybe I just forgot. But that seems pretty unique to Wyden and maybe a couple other agencies. What
Yeah.
else? What else is it? Being in Portland is its own culture, and you got Nike next door. I
Mhm.
think I don't know
Yeah.
geography.
Yeah.
So you got Nike over there. You got Wyden. I
Mhm.
mean, that Air movie came out, and I literally watched it twice.
Oh, you
I
have?
was watching
Yeah.
it very closely to see if they mentioned Wyden and Kennedy. And I do recall uh, one of the characters. It was the sports marketing guy. His name, uh, I can't think of his name right now, but he definitely mentions Dan Wyden in the movie. I'm like, yes. And I was like in the
we're,
theater. I
we're
was
in
like, yeah,
there.
there he is.
Yeah, okay. Shamefully, I have to say I haven't watched it yet. They
Oh, it's
they
so
told
good.
us to watch it, but I haven't. But I will. I will. But yeah, no. Portland and Wyden overall is really cool. It's a lot of fun working there. I think so far I feel like I've been super lucky. Like like I said, I've worked with some really awesome creative directors. No, creative partners. Whoa. I've worked with some great creative directors too. I've worked
Sure.
with some really awesome partners. It feels a little bit like a summer camp. There's a lot of activities. I can't go to all of them, but they are always doing something. There's like a pie eating competition, and then there'll be like, I don't know, karaoke, and then there'll be a movie that they're showing.
In the office or like
Yeah, at the
just all the
office.
time?
Yeah, just lots of stuff that happens at work. It's really fun. So
Tell us
yeah.
some stuff, because we've had a couple Widen people on from New
Hmm.
York and or Portland. Tell us some stuff we might not know that's different that you thought when you first saw it, when you walked in, or when you started there 2 years ago, that really shocked you. That's something that the listener might not ever experience.
Okay, some things that really shocked me. I think the first thing that shocked me was how diverse it is. Um, and like I know that that's kind of like a thing that Wyden is like known for, at least in like people of color circles. Like I
Mhm.
remember before getting to Wyden, people would always talk about how diverse it is, but getting there, and it's not by any means like the most diverse agency ever, because like there are no diverse agencies, but like it was definitely like surprising to see how many people of color that there were and where they were. Like a lot of places you go there and it's just interns, whereas this place it was like, okay, cool, like not many creative directors, but like one or two. And slowly trying to like push people to the top, which is interesting. I was also very surprised by how willing they were to just like change things to make the work better. Like even simple things like deadlines. Like I remember I was working on this really small thing when I first got there, and my supervisor was just like, my creative director was basically like, I don't think this is ready. Let's just push the client meeting out by like a couple days. And I was like, a couple days? This is a Twitter thing. I don't need a couple. But it was really surprising. It's so weird how like indoctrinated I am in advertising that like the concept of pushing a client meeting out by like even just a few days for something that was kind of small because it was just like a Twitter thing. I was like, wow, wow,
Right.
wow.
That helps.
Yeah, so that was kind of crazy. What else? What else was very surprising? Um, I think it's very I don't know if I think that's surprising because maybe that's something that people talk about a lot. It is kind of cultish. Um
Yeah. Yeah.
and, and
In a good way, right?
yeah, I mean in a good way, yeah, absolutely. But it is very cultish. And I think I remember also hearing that, and I think the things that I thought might have been cultish about it when before I joined versus the things that I identify as cultish now have definitely shifted. I do think that like the things that I'm constantly just like LOL about is just there's such like a reinforced belief around like authenticity and being yourself and like opening yourself up and just being who you are. And like I think that weirdly that makes it feel more cultish because they're just like really pushing for like psychological safety, and then you feel like you have to stay.
I get that. I get that. How do you create a welcoming environment and like reinforce these messages in a way that's not brainwashing, I guess? I get what
Yeah.
you're saying. Like it's just like the typical, like, oh, we're all family here. Like that's a big red flag. Like in my
Yeah.
book, if they're
Yeah.
saying like, oh yeah, we're all family, we work hard and play hard, and we have a lot of fun together, but we get stuff done. We're a big family. Like to me, I don't love that. Like I don't know if they're phrasing it that way, but I can see how some companies are not true to that. But
Yeah.
if they're actually, it seems like if you're actually like preaching like good values and you are getting the best of people, then there's nothing wrong with that too.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's kind of the thing. Like, I think the way that they're like the indoctrination at Wyden is just very different than the ways I've heard it. So, to your point around like, oh, we're like a family, like that's not really something that people say here that much. It's more just like it's okay to fail. And like I'm having creative directors routinely just be like, push back on stuff if you don't like it. If you don't think this is a good idea, just tell me you don't like it. Or just like be authentic. It's okay to bring yourself. And there's like ginormous conversations that are constantly happening around like how to bring your full self to work. And I think the things that I have found very interesting about Wieden, as somebody who like looked at this place for a very long time and has now finally kind of gotten here, is how the things that they're really asking for are very different, at least to me, than the things that I've experienced at a lot of other agencies. You know, they're really, 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 really pushing for you to just like be honest and be yourself. And like, I think it's funny that I started a Lion podcast a couple years ago, because like, I think sometimes that if I had worked at Wieden at the time that I had that idea, would I even have started that podcast? Because like so much of what I did at that time was just put on fronts. And that's not to say that I don't do that now, but I think that like working at Wieden after the last 2 years has just been such like an interesting experience of like people really pushing for authenticity and then actual acceptance when you get that, that like I'm like, oh shit, like maybe I just like I probably actually wouldn't have started that podcast. But
Wow.
yeah, I don't know.
So it's made you a better human.
Uh,
Have you bought into the system? Do you believe it? Has it gotten the most out of you? Do you feel like you actually are welcome to show up? I can't bring my full self to work. Nobody wants that. I feel like sometimes you don't want me to be my full self at all. I get in a lot of trouble, and I probably would not have a job. So whatever that means, how do you feel like you've evolved in the past
funny,
2 years?
funny. Yeah, I mean, I look at the things that I just said, and that definitely sounds like I'm super Kool-Aid drinking. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I think I've become like a better person, but I am appreciative and acknowledge that like a place that is constantly pushing for that kind of stuff, eventually it kind of just does get to you a little bit.
I
I'll
mean, you
say
want that
that.
though. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that.
I'll say that,
That's good.
you
I mean, it's
know.
better than the companies that don't do that or do the opposite and teach you how to talk and walk and want you to abide by their systems and rules. And you
Yeah.
have to feel like you're putting on a front. So
Yeah.
it
So
seems like a nice workplace.
yeah, no, it is, it's a lot of fun. And like, you know, it's an agency, so it's not without its problems.
Yeah.
And I definitely do not want to like paper over that
Mhm.
because it's definitely an agency, so like there's just agency nonsense everywhere. But I think of all the places that I've worked, I definitely am willing to acknowledge that there is a lot of stuff about this agency specifically around the kind of messaging of internal values is very different, and I can often see how that is lived out. So it's propaganda, it's advertising.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So, so I
Okay.
don't know. That's what I've been thinking about for the last 2 years, or that's what I've witnessed.
Yeah. I hear you. But you've been there for 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
You worked on visa.
Mm-hmm.
And now what?
I'm on a pitch, so
Oh, can't
yeah.
we'll talk offline.
Yeah, so
Mm.
I'm on a pitch. I was on Old Spice for a bunch of last year. I did a little bit of Old Spice this year as well. What else? Worked on Samsung for a hot second. Yeah, lots of random stuff.
Gotcha. And
Mhm.
okay. Uh, and have you always lived in Portland?
No, I have lived all over the place.
Well, let's throw it back then. Let's
So,
let's let's kick it back to when you decided that you wanted to make ads for a living, to write ads for a living. Where were you? What were you doing? Give me that
um,
epiphany moment. Or
I
unless it never happened and you're like,
oh no, it kind
why
of
am I making
did.
ads?
No, it kind of did. I was living with my parents at the time. They were living in Tennessee. I was unemployed. I had worked in fashion when I got out of college, and I hadn't liked that. And then I had worked
Where'd you
in
go to school?
startups. I went to school in England. I'm French, by the way. I didn't mention that, but I am a
What is
French person.
what what does that mean?
Like I have a French passport and I'm a French citizen.
Oh, where were you born?
In Martinique, which is like a French island.
Oh, we should
Yeah.
have started with that. So you were born there.
Uh-huh.
What'd you do
Uh,
over there? Eat good food?
yeah, eat good food, be a baby.
That's cool.
It was a lot of fun. And then when I was 6, my parents moved to the US for the first time. And then we kind of did a bunch of back and forth. And then I moved to England when I was 13. And so I lived there for
What was going on over there?
in England.
Yeah.
There's lots of British people.
Why England?
There's
Was that where your
nothing.
family found jobs there?
Yeah, like my parents were just kind of doing stuff in England.
Cool.
Yeah, so we lived in England for a bit. And so yeah, I went to school there, I went to college there, and then when I got out of college, I moved to New York and I worked in fashion for like
By
35
yourself.
seconds.
Family stayed in England.
Mhm.
And then you're like, I'm going to New York. So you
Yeah. Yeah. And I lived in New York for a very short amount of time. I think it was maybe 6 months, maybe a little over that. And I was just like working in fashion and I didn't
what
have
was
a
the
good
dream at the
time
time? What was the dream?
working in fashion.
So
That's what I wanted to
you
do.
were living the dream,
I
working in
was,
fashion for
and
6 months in New York.
I wasn't very happy.
Mm-hmm.
And then I lost my job, so it didn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, so then I came back and then I went back to London and I worked in startups for 2 years ish. And I just kind of did anything that I could find to do in a startup. Like I wasn't a developer, so most of the jobs are kind of like admin-y, but like I did some HR stuff, I did some finance stuff, I did some marketing stuff, I did some recruitment stuff. Like startups are startup-y, so you kind of just
Yeah,
end
you
up
gotta do
doing
everything.
lots of stuff.
Yeah.
And so I did that for 2 years, and startups are like, notoriously difficult. So they like fail all the time. And so like a bunch of the ones that I worked in failed. And so then I like lost my job, I think 5 times. And
5 times
then
in the startup world?
yeah,
Cool.
in 2 years.
Nice.
Yeah, I was like really good at being unemployed, but then employed again.
Okay.
Um,
Builds
yeah,
resilience, right?
very, very resilient. And so then I stopped doing that and I like went to live with my parents for a couple months. And while I was there, I was just trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And I was just like on Google trying to figure out what job I could have. And I kept finding jobs I kept seeing jobs for like copywriting and like it looked cool and it sounded interesting. And I was kind of just like, Googling what copywriting was and what jobs I could do that like kind of were creative, sort of collaborative. Like it was just like a lot of stuff that all came together. And so yeah, and then from there, I just was looking at these jobs and they were all saying portfolio schools. So then I started Googling portfolio schools and I found one in Minneapolis. And so then I went to Minneapolis. I went to Brainco and
Brandco. I've never heard of Brandco.
Brainco.
Brainco.
Brainco, yeah.
Never heard of it.
Yeah, it's like a really small ad school in Minneapolis. The Miami ad school that was there closed like a semester before I got there. So there was nothing else there at that time apart from
Sure.
Brainco. And it was like the cheapest ad school that I could find in the country.
Hey,
So
take it. Yeah.
yeah, that was basically it.
Okay, let me pause you there.
Mhm.
So you did startups,
Mm-hmm.
on and off startups. You're
Mm-hmm.
like, F that, I'm done.
Mm-hmm.
You moved back home in
Mm-hmm.
London with your family.
Well, actually, my parents had moved by that point, so they were in Tennessee. There's a lot of locations in this story. I'm so
Okay,
sorry.
no, that's why I piece it together. That's why I break
Yeah,
it down.
there's a lot
So
of
you,
locations in this
so you were
story.
in London doing a lot of startups then, or was
Yes.
it just
Yeah,
all
I was
over?
in London. Yeah, I was in London doing a lot of startups. And then after I lost my fifth one or whatever number I was on by then, I decided to just crash with my parents for a couple of months.
In
And then,
Tennessee.
yeah, in
Where in
Tennessee,
Tennessee?
near Chattanooga.
Do you like it over there?
That was all right.
Yeah, that was you didn't. Yeah, it wasn't.
Yeah, that was
I'm
okay.
not getting the best read on you on that one.
I was like
Was that a white lie?
unemployed and
Was it a fib?
no, it was okay. I was unemployed and sad at the time. So like I don't
Right.
know if I experienced it at like
Context,
the best time,
negative association.
Yeah, like I was
Yeah.
just like, what am I
You were
doing? Where am
lost. You might have
I?
been. Yeah. So you probably have a bad taste in your. Are they still there?
No.
Good.
Um
Never
so
going back.
Yeah, no.
How can I ask you, how old
Mhm.
were you when you kind of had this moment where you went back to your family? Is that legal to ask?
Yeah, no, it's a podcast. Most things are legal on podcasts.
You'd be surprised.
I think I was maybe like 23, 24.
Okay.
So I was still kind of young.
So you're college
Um,
educated, you
mhm,
had a degree, you
mhm,
had some fashion, you did some
yeah.
startups.
Mhm,
You went from New York to London to
mhm.
Tennessee. So you've been over, you're not afraid to take chances, start over, start new. Like, and what, tell me a little bit about that moment when you moved back into your parents' place in Tennessee. Like, paint us a picture, because a lot of people go through this, and a lot of people will go through this in their lives listening. Um, what was going on through your mind? How did you have these discussions with your parents, and like, where did you turn to for like resources?
Okay, so what was going through my mind was like, what am I gonna do with my life? Um, I think I have always felt like capable of incredible things, but I didn't know how. And I, at that point, was like really disappointed and frustrated because I feel like I'd really let myself down and I'd like hit a lot of dead ends. And to your point around resilience, I'd gotten laid off a lot and I felt a lot of like embarrassment and shame because like it's embarrassing to lose your job a bunch. So, or at least
To
it felt like
you, or
that
to your
to me.
family, or your
To
friends? Who?
me,
Yeah, because
like
it's
I
one
don't
thing when,
know.
if you have parents that, have high standards. There
Yeah,
are scenarios, there's those case studies all the time.
yeah.
Was this the case for you?
No, I think my parents were just kind of like, "What are you doing?" But I don't know if I think they were like, "You're not meeting our standards," as much as they were just like, "What are you going to do?" And I was like, "I don't know." Um, I wish I knew. So that was kind of what was going through my mind. My dad has a PhD and my mom has two master's degrees, so they're big education people. And my dad's big plan is always like, go to back to school, just go back to school. And I was like, Dad, I don't know what to do in school. That's not gonna
Yeah,
help.
yeah,
And so like I didn't want to just go back to school and do a master like an MBA or something that seemed really silly. So I just like spent a lot of honestly just a lot of like idle time on television and just like on the internet. At that time I started watching Mad Men. So
ah,
like
yeah,
so when I saw copywriter jobs, I like sort of knew what that was, but like obviously like Mad Men's like a TV show and like that stuff
yeah.
is fake and it
Based in
was
the
based in the 50s.
60s.
Yeah, like it was based at a different time. So like those jobs didn't really make any sense to me, but like I got that it was creative and like because I was just sitting there kind of googling random idle things like jobs to do if you like working with people or
Yeah,
jobs to do if you know what I mean? Like I was just kind of like stumbling around. Like I was like very haphazardly finding
sure.
things, like there was no big
You needed the breaking and entering advertising podcast at the
I
time.
did actually at that time. This would have been super helpful. So yeah, so it was just kind of like, okay, cool. Like, this sounds kind of cool, and I don't know, but I'm just gonna try. So like then it was like applying for a bunch of copywriting jobs and like realizing that I wasn't getting any traction and then being like, okay, well, all these job postings keep talking about portfolio school. What is that? And then Googling portfolio school and then finding out what that is and then I made a list of every portfolio school in the country and I even found some in England if I wanted to go back there. Well, I found one. And then deciding to be like, okay, cool. Well, let's just do the cheapest one. Like
Yeah,
that's going to be the one that will cost the less money. So if this doesn't work out, then I'm not out like $40,000.
yeah, they can add up for sure.
I only spent 13.
Yeah,
Um, so yeah, and
paid
that
for
was
that,
kind of it.
and you did that in Minneapolis,
I
Brain
did.
Co.
I did.
And
I moved to Minneapolis and I didn't
from Tennessee.
realize, yeah, and I didn't realize that I didn't know where Minneapolis was or what it was until like I touched down and I was like, oh, I've never been here.
Yeah, what were you
Um,
thinking?
I don't know.
Great.
I was
I'm
just
just
chasing a dream.
I'm just kidding. No, I'm not just kidding. I don't know. I kind of mean it. Um, because they do have a great ad community and they have a
They
couple really
do.
good shops over there.
They
And
do.
I have some good friends in Minneapolis, so I don't want to talk shit, but it's freaking cold.
It's super cold. I moved there in December. It was
Oh my
freezing.
gosh, couldn't pay me.
Yeah, I hated it. That was really terrible.
So
But
you enrolled in this portfolio school program. Was it a
mhm.
year or was it 2 years?
Yeah, it was a year, but I took longer than a year because like I was working full time. I got a job at the University of Minnesota and
Doing
like
what?
I was an admin again. Well, actually this time I was an executive assistant.
Okay, what's up?
Um,
Who is your
yeah,
executive that you were assisting?
I was managing the calendars of a bunch of associate deans at the College of Biological Sciences. So I had like like a day job,
Hmm.
and then in the evenings I'd go to Brainco. But I was busy and I couldn't quite get everything together in the year that I had. So like I ended
Yeah.
up going for a lot longer, well, like a year and a half, and then from there
You have
I
to pay extra if you take longer on that?
no.
Hmm.
So
Good.
that was good. Yeah, so that was good. So yeah, so did that, then got an internship at Fallon.
Because your
Um,
book was good, you networked while I'm sure that the Brain Co had these built. Did they have a built-in internship or you just kind of,
nah, no
they just
built-in
like,
internship.
they
It
built
was
you a good portfolio. They gave you good briefs every
I
month or so,
I
whatever it
built
looks
an
like.
okay portfolio. I like mostly networked.
Yeah.
I
But
like
even saying that you go to Brain Co, I'm sure in that community, they're like, okay, like you get the
yeah, I
process.
mean,
Like that's a leg up, right?
yeah, I mean, people like a lot of people in Minneapolis had heard of it and had been there, so it definitely wasn't nothing. But like, I think of the people who I went to ad school with, I definitely like had the hardest time. So I kind of was like, okay, this book thing is going to be not what's going to work. I'm just going to have to like meet people and figure out how to get there. So that's kind of what I did. Like, I just
Why'd you
like,
have the hardest time?
I just was kind of bad at advertising when I started.
There you go.
I was kind of,
Can't, yeah.
I was
Did
garbage
you
at
have
it.
like a partner at the time, like in ad
No,
school?
well, they partnered you with different people in ad
Hmm.
school. I just was like, I don't know, like I had a hard time. Like I wasn't naturally good at it. I think there's lots of people who are like, oh, advertising can't be taught, and I'm definitely an example of somebody who had to learn advertising. Like creativity is something that I actively pursued and found because like otherwise I just was not that good at it.
But
Um,
now you are.
I'm okay.
Yeah, you're in a good spot.
um,
So continue the story. So you just kind of called some people up. You weren't too confident in your book at the time.
yeah, and so I
Well, you
just
got an
like
internship at the best agency in Minneapolis.
I just like networked. Yeah, like I had messaged the recruiter and we'd gotten lunch or breakfast or whatever, and we just like talked, and like I talked to as many recruiters in the agency as I could, and then I talked to a bunch of creative directors. I talked to anyone who would talk to me. And so yeah, so then the recruiter, when the internship came up, I had applied and she like knew to look out for my stuff. And so yeah, so then I interned at Fallon for a couple
What
months.
role?
Creative intern.
Nice. You did
Yeah,
it. You broke in kind of.
I did.
You
Yeah,
broke into an internship. That's a
I
thing. That's a
did.
big thing.
Yeah, it was
It's
super
hard for
hard.
people. I think
Yeah,
internships are harder sometimes than entry level jobs because they all open up at the same time and everybody in the world's applying for the same slots.
yeah. And it was and I really really wanted to intern at Fallon. So like that
Did you go all in, just like all your eggs at Fallon? Did you diversify your like
I
application tactics?
applied. Yeah, I mean, I applied for most of the internships in town, but I got I interviewed for some. I think I remember Carmex and Lynch was one of them, and then the only
Yeah,
one that I got offered was Fallon, so that was fine because that was the one I wanted anyways. And
nice.
then yeah, so that was a hard 3 months. I hated it. That was tough. I was like, oh, maybe advertising isn't for me. But then and then I didn't get like offered a job or anything, so I was kind of like scrambling to see what I could do. And then I one of my friends in ad school had passed my book to someone at another agency in town
Cole
Cole
McBoy.
McVoy.
Yep, I'm here.
Cole McVoy. So then I interned there for a couple of months.
Another internship.
Yeah, I did 2 internships back to back. And
My
around that
goodness.
time, I had started my first podcast, which is Borrowed Interest. And it like kind of took off. Like we were on the first page of Ad Week.
That's
We
what's up.
had, yeah, I think we were like there was like the one day where I think we were the second most read article that day on the website. Like
Who covered it?
Gosh, I can't even remember.
Oh, that's bad on you. You got to know that.
I know.
I'm
It was
PR. I'm PR. That's why I need to know that
6
stuff.
years ago.
Okay, you're good.
It was a long time
So it
ago.
blew up though, that
Yeah,
podcast.
so it did really well. We had like tens of thousands of listeners. People were really excited. Got interviewed for some stuff. We got interviewed on some other podcasts. So that was cool. And so I kind of like used that coverage or whatever to
Yeah.
like score a job at Mono.
What's Mono?
Mono's an agency in New York. Oh, not New York, sorry, Minneapolis.
It's okay. So
Yeah.
you were doing Cole McVoy internship, creative internship, I'm assuming. Maybe did you specify for copywriting at this point?
Yeah.
So you're doing copywriting at Cole McVoy, and then you also, while you were doing this this internship, you and your friends started Borrowed Interest, the podcast.
Yeah.
And you probably, did you love Cole McVoy? Were you just like, I just need like a creative outlet on the side as well? Is that why you started the podcast?
Yeah, I mean, Cole McVoy was cool. I think I started the podcast because I think I just kind of I just really wanted to start a podcast. Like it sounds really
Nothing wrong with that.
silly, but like I just
That's a terrible starting podcast. Is a terrible idea.
Don't do it.
Don't do it.
I just like really wanted to start a podcast, and like I had these.
Was it interview format or just back and forth with your friends?
It was a blend. So like there were most episodes where it was just the three of us, and we'd have a topic and we'd like talk about it, and then like depending on what episode it was, we'd like have guests. And so yeah, we like interviewed guests. Like it was a fun little project.
Oh, this is cool.
Yeah, so we did that. Yeah. So did Borrowed Interest for a bit.
And that blew up and you got recognition. And then what happened? Like Mono was like, oh, we want you to work here.
Yeah. And Amalia, the producer, had worked there, and they had helped us like through a little Mono program, she had been able to like secure, it was like a small amount of money, like a few $1,000s, like $2,000 or something, to help us with recording costs. So like they already knew who I was. They were excited about the podcast, and they were like, of course we'll have Shareina. Shareina's great. And so so I got a job at Mono, and I worked there for a year.
Full-time copywriter?
Yeah, full-time. That was my first time full-time gig. I was really excited.
Look at this story. This break-in is this is a really cool break-in story. I mean, from going back to England, doing multiple startups, to going back home to Tennessee at the time, to not sure what you're doing, watching Mad Men, figuring out copywriting is a thing, and then realizing that you can't do it without portfolio school, which is not necessarily true. I'm sure like there are ways to break in without portfolio school. I'm not saying this is a one size fits all, but then you went to Minneapolis, of all the places in the United States, and
the most random place.
But pretty good advertising, so I will give you that. And you scored the big internship out of your, I'm sure you were the shit out of your portfolio like class, right? Because everybody wants the Fallon internship, I'm sure. So you thought you made it, maybe like this was it. You're gonna work at Fallon full time.
Yeah.
This is the dream. Didn't work out.
Nope.
Then you didn't give up. You got Cole McVoy, and you got that through a friend connection.
Through somebody,
to another internship, another 3 months of interning, low pay, I'm sure, right?
Yeah, like $17 an hour.
Nothing great. And you kept persevering, and you're like, you know what, screw it too. I'm going to actually add on some more to my plate, and I'm going to do this podcast. And that blew up and got you noticed.
Yeah, and that was great. And then from there, I got my job at Mono. That was cool. That was an also rough year. The first like 2 to 3 years of my career were pretty hard. I'm not even gonna lie. Like I just had a really hard time. Like I don't. And this is like, I hate when people are self-deprecating, and this is absolutely not me being self-deprecating. I can follow this up later by saying lots of nice things about myself, because I genuinely do believe that I am talented. But like, I was not good at advertising. I think it is a very specific set of skills, and like, I just didn't have them.
Sure.
I just
But it took a
really
while.
didn't
It took
have
some time.
them. Yeah, it took a lot of time. It took a lot of absorption. I think I was always a decently strong writer, but I think the type of voice that you need in order to be successful in advertising, I just didn't really have. Like, and this is like, I like don't want to be racial, but I do actually think that a lot of it is just like the people in charge are white, and so they like there's a lot of like black writers, and a lot of the black writers that I know always talk about just like knowing how to like write white, and like knowing how to write things in a way that like your white creative directors and your white clients and stuff like that, they'll understand. And I just really didn't have that either. So that was like an additional layer of complexity where I was really trying to figure out like how to write things in a way that like people liked. And it was just like really challenging. So that was sucky.
That seems pretty messed up.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it is. I'm not like I don't know, it isn't. I think I just like am acknowledging that like that's kind of how it is for a
Mhm.
lot of black creatives specifically. Like it's a very specific style that you really have to like get used to creating and thinking and talking and writing in.
For
And I
sure.
think that was like an additional layer of just like an additional layer of complexity that I was really struggling with.
So with all
So
this struggle and having to write and act maybe in a different way
mhm,
than you are, were there
mhm.
any moments where you're like, after this, like I'm not changing who I am, my style, my tone, or like this industry isn't for me? How many times did that cross your mind? Because I'm sure it did. It crosses everybody's mind.
um I I don't really think I ever really had that. Like
Oh,
I
really? I
think
have that every morning. No, just kidding.
I mean, sometimes I'm like, well, the like I every day I wake up and I want to quit my job, but like
Yeah, of
the
course.
like the the forget this industry thing did not
The
necessarily
bigger
occur to
picture.
me because I didn't really have a backup. Like
Yeah.
I was like, I have to make this thing work right now. Like I'm going to make this thing work. I just am going to make it work.
Yeah.
So like I think the the struggle and the frustration was just around like how hard it was to make it work versus like I'm just gonna throw in the towel. And
So what
like especially those early years, I was very, very, very focused on like trying to get to a good agency. Like I was in Minneapolis, I wanted to work at Wieden. I wanted to work at some of those big agencies. And
yeah.
so I just spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to get to those places.
So what'd you do?
So actually, this is where the podcast was another really great gift that I gave myself. So
Let's
early
hear it.
on in the podcast, I had applied to go to this thing called We're All the Black People. And it's
Yep.
this event that happens in New York. And it's just like a lot of industry people, and they're all it's like kind of a diversity recruitment event. But one of the things that I had done or applied for was like, there's like a talent pitch portion where you like go up and you have 2 minutes and you show people what your talent is. And so I pitched the podcast. The day that I did the talent pitch was the day that the podcast actually went live. So it was like semi-promotional where I was just like trying to get people to listen to it, but it also
Sure.
like worked as like, oh yeah, like I'm Shareina and da da da. And the first person who talked to me when I got off the stage was this wonderful creative director named Ronnie Castor. He at
Oh
the
yeah.
time was
Chicago.
yeah, he was in Chicago actually, yeah.
Yeah.
I think he was a DDB. So him and his art director partner, Anthony O'Neill, they talked to me. And I remember being like, oh, wow, Black creative directors. That's amazing. They were the first ones I'd ever met.
Sure.
And so I was like, cool, creative director, DDB, remember. And then I completely forgot about them. I just literally forgot they existed until I was going on a trip to Chicago to visit my sister. And I remembered creative directors DDB, and I looked them up on like I was just like sifting through creative directors on LinkedIn until I found them. And then I hit them up and was like, hey, I'm gonna be in your city, we should hang out. Because again, the thing that I did was just people. Like I was literally like, if my book is gonna be garbage, I'm going to make friends with everybody
Right.
ever.
Hey, it's good strategy.
Yeah. And so then I'd hit them up and I was like, I'm going to be in your city. We should hang out. And they were like, oh, we just took this. We're actually going to be in San Francisco because we just took this job. But actually, we're going to be back in Chicago for a weekend. So let's actually hang out. I
Oh,
was
it
like,
worked.
oh, cool. Yeah.
So they got a job at
Serendipitous.
Goodby.
Yeah. They had gotten jobs at Goodby.
When you say San Francisco, there's very few agencies that
Yeah.
stick out, and Goodby is one of them.
Yeah. So they had gotten a job at Goodby, but Ronnie was back in town. Anthony wasn't there, but Ronnie was back in town. And we kind of just like chit chatted for like an hour. And he was like, yeah, dude, like you should work at Goodby. You should look at Goodby. And I was like, oh yeah, sure.
Maybe.
Sure, if
Whatever
they'll
you
have
say.
me. I don't know. And so then he connected me to a recruiter and we had a really cool chat. And then I totally forgot about it until one day when I was really mad at work. And I was like, oh, I haven't sent him a thank you note and it's been 3 months. So I sent him a thank you note, the recruiter a thank you note, even though it had been 3 months. And I was like, hey, I make it a point to thank everybody who talks to me, even if it's really late. And he looked at my book after I sent him that email and he was like, oh my goodness, I just looked at your book again. Like, we should talk for real.
Hey, so your book wasn't bad.
Yeah, I mean, he really liked the podcast.
Okay.
He really likes the podcast.
Okay. Nothing wrong with that. You got something in there. That's good.
So yeah. And so then, yeah, I interviewed at Goodby and then a couple months later I started at Goodby and that was cool. Yeah, and so I worked there for 2 years.
San Francisco, you got to work out with all the hills over there, and it's great. It's so crazy over there.
It's insane, and they were like on a really, really big hill. So yeah, did that for 2 years.
And that's like a really kick-ass agency. Like that's a really good name.
Huge jump, yeah.
Super Bowl, like Got Milk, the Snickers work over there, I believe. I mean, it doesn't really get much better. Like caliber of creativity wise, you know, that's a big time. That's a Titan shop, right? Like, did you meet Jeff and Rich? I'm trying to get them tell them to get on the podcast. If you're listening right now, you've been reaching out.
I should actually do that. Yeah. Okay.
I've reached out. Jeff got back to me and he was like, he got back to me once and he's like, you should talk to somebody else. No, I'm talking to you. You're up next. I don't care if you did a master class on you're coming on the show.
Hilarious. Next time that I see Jeff, I will talk to him about that. He's very, very sweet, actually. And he was on my podcast.
That's bull. You got me.
Yeah, no. So he was yeah, so we interviewed for an episode of Back of Lights. That was great.
Nice. Yeah. So you were there for 2 years? How long?
Yeah, I worked there for 2 years, worked on Xfinity.
I'm sure it's not easy to keep up over there.
Like, it was hard. Like
it's they work you probably. I mean,
the
caliber.
It's a lot of work, and more than anything, it's just like the way that the agency is structured, especially the creative department. It is kill or be killed. It is chase, and just it's a lot of you have to expect that
at the shops at that level that are consistently producing high caliber work. Maybe not Wieden. maybe not Wieden, right? I don't know.
I think things are just structured differently at Wieden, and so yeah, it was. And so again, like I was just in a situation where I was just like continuing to have a hard time. So like, but a lot of what happened at Goodby Silverstein was just like, if you didn't get a good in with good creative directors, you weren't going to be on good projects. So like I was, for like what felt like the millionth time, just like hustling my fucking butt off. Like I was just like going into their offices, asking them what briefs they were on, asking them how their stuff nowadays were going, asking them about their girlfriends, asking them about their babies. Like I just literally was like constantly just like going into people's offices and just being like, hey, I see that you like the color purple. Talk to me about that.
People don't do this nowadays. I think this is actually a really good lesson. Like with the Zoom and like my interns, like I'm trying to get them to show up right now consistently, even on the days that people aren't here. Like just being here and having those conversations. Like I got myself into a creative pitch, or not a pitch, but like a brainstorm session and I go, you need the spark plug? And they go, no, get out, Gino. But I'm there. I'm ready to roll. I come up with some ideas when they don't want it, but they don't get a choice when I'm there. They're not kicking me out.
Yeah.
But I get what you're saying. Like,
That's a lot.
it helps to show up and.
Yeah. And well, it doesn't even help. It was just like the only way, because otherwise you got stuck on bad briefs and bad projects that nobody wanted to do. And then that was going to be your career. It was just a lot of like hustle.
But definitely a great experience. I mean, and then from there, I see you went freelance for a little bit.
I did. So after working at Goodby for 2 years, I just kind of burnt out. Like I was super tired. Every day I'd wake up and I'd be like, I don't want to work. And not only do I not want to work, I just literally don't want a job.
Yeah. It's a real thing.
Yeah, it was.
Did you see that coming, or did it hit you all at once one day?
It was kind of like a slow build up. I think like there was like, lots of people in COVID got a little burnt out. Like it was a lot of work. There was one specific project that had definitely like me into the actual ground. Yeah. And then like there was just like a lot of compounding stresses. Like working at any agency in 2020 wasn't that much fun. And I think to Goodby's credit, like they did the best that they could. But like
it was a hard time for everybody.
I think everybody was trying to figure a lot of stuff out. And I think I was personally very tired of like being Black at work at that time. So then, I quit my job. Do
you want to explain, like get into that?
I mean, I guess it's funny. I haven't really thought about it in a really long time, so I'm probably not going to do a good job of explaining it. But I think I just at that time was very conscious of the fact that I was like experiencing a lot of difference. And then in addition to the difference that I was experiencing, then was the like added pressure of like everybody suddenly realizing that I was experiencing this difference and like having a lot of questions about like how they were going to change that. And like of me specifically, because at that time, Goodby was 400 employees and there were 10 of us, 10 Black people. So like,
shit.
It wasn't like, I was like routinely in meetings with like Goodby, Silverstein, all of the other partners, and they're sitting there at me, looking at me, Shareina. I'm at that point like maybe 27 or something, and they're like, well, how do we fix this? And I'm like, I don't know. I stopped being an intern like very recently. Like I don't know. I don't know how to fix your diversity problem. I'm a baby. Well, no, I was a grown up, but you know what I mean.
I hear you. Was it just unnecessary pressure? Like, was it something that maybe your job wasn't what you thought it was going to be? Like, what? Because I don't know. What were you thinking when all that, was it too much pressure, or like you thought it was unfair? Like, what were you going through?
I think I was just kind of like tired of like simultaneously experiencing a lot of microaggressions. Cause that's the thing. It's just like, and never feeling like what I was bringing to the table was good enough, despite the fact that I felt like I was bringing everything that I could. And I felt that feeling after. I think that was definitely something that I needed to work on, and this is not to say that like, this isn't, it wasn't a product of like being in a mostly white environment, but being a Black person in any environment, but specifically in mostly Black environments, does mean that you're under a lot of pressure to like basically be better than everybody else to prove that you're supposed to be there.
Yeah.
Like if there is only, it was literally like until this other writer, Taj, got hired, like it was like me and Ronnie, we were the only Black writers in the entire agency, and like then things would happen. So, or I was constantly just being told that I'm not important. So like, for example, really quick example.
Oh, shit.
So there was a brief that I was super, super busy near the end of the year that I quit the following year. I was super, super busy. There was a brief that had happened. The clients had demanded that they needed a person of color. They absolutely needed people of color. They absolutely needed people of color. And we all talked to each other. And what I found out was that basically the creative resource manager asked the creatives in order of importance whether or not they would be free. So first they asked Ronnie and Anthony as the Black creative directors. Then they asked the senior Black senior female art director if she would do it. She said no. Ronnie and Anthony had already passed by that point. Then he turned around and he went to a more junior male Black creative. Tosh said no. And then they went to me. And then I said no. And then we passed it back around. So like stuff like that. And like that was like a very rare and bizarre example of stuff where it was just constantly like, oh, not only are you different, but you're also just like the least important one.
Right.
So I don't know. That was kind of a lot of waffle. And now I'm going to turn this into the 2-hour podcast that I said I wouldn't do at the top.
No, that's all good. I'm sorry you had to go through that. I mean.
So anyway, so it was just like stuff like that would happen. And I don't know, like I think after a while, I just kind of got tired. Like I was working crazy hours. I was trying to make stuff happen. And it just kind of felt like I wasn't really making any progress. And like, I felt like I was just like always working and like constantly missing stuff, missing birthdays, missing anniversaries. And like, for what, you know?
Right.
And so then I went freelance and I quit my job. And yeah, I just kind of just went freelance. That was cool. Best job I've ever had. I got to stay out of agency politics for the first time. I also, for the first time ever, just felt like I wasn't constantly hustling, which is weird.
Yeah. I can't imagine. It sounds nice.
It was awesome. I just literally just like worked the jobs that I had because I kind of cobbled a bunch of them together. And then I just sort of like was chilling and I was like writing a lot. And I was just like working on personal projects.
Yeah.
And
were you living in San Francisco at the time?
No, I'd moved back to Minneapolis. My like life partner is from there, and so we had moved back to Minneapolis during the pandemic. So we were just.
Was your life partner with you in San Francisco?
Yeah.
Okay, and then you both decided we're going to go back to Minneapolis.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. I mean, how can you afford? I mean, like it's not cheap over there.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I get it.
So it's like, yeah, so it's really, really, really expensive.
Where did you live in San Francisco?
We were in Oakland.
Nice.
Yeah, Oakland is awesome.
Yeah. Okay. So you're like, all right, freelance. Let's go back to Minneapolis. Figure some stuff out.
So
just live a little for a couple of years.
Yeah, living, being happy, working on some stuff. I had gotten hooked up to a friend of a friend who was working on a graphic novel. So I worked on that. I did the copy and he was working on the illustration. Nice. And I just finished it when I got an email from Wieden that was like, hey, we're interested in potentially talking to you. And I was like,
no. They're reeling you back in.
No.
Just as you thought you could be free.
Time anymore.
Who reached out to you? Was it Barry?
No, it was Lauren Rinke.
No, she's over at Collins, I think.
Yeah.
She won't come on my podcast either. I've reached out to her. So Lauren, if you're listening,
funny.
You're getting shot. You're getting called out. Get on the show.
Funny.
Yeah. She's great though, and it obviously worked. Whatever she said.
Yeah.
Because you went there, and now you're still there.
Yes. So I took a job and initially was kind of like,
Well, we'll wrap this up. I think I want to know, what was your rationale? You were enjoying time in Minneapolis. You were with your life partner and you're doing you finished a book, a graphic novel, and this thing could be selling millions of copies. You don't know. Like this could be your out and you could have hit gold, but what made you say, okay, I'm going to give this another shot?
I think one, the fact that like my little tiny baby intern dream had been to work at Wieden, and two, just the knowledge that like it was probably going to be my last full-time advertising job, which I still believe this is my last
that's fair
full-time advertising job.
What's next?
I don't know, just like
we'll figure it out later.
Yeah. Well, there's
You're an entrepreneur. It seems like,
There's stuff.
you got stuff in the works. I know you do.
Yeah, there's stuff.
Gotcha.
So yeah, so
So,
I just working
but
on
then you wanted to
stuff.
go to Portland? Is that where you're at, or did you work remote? Are you working
Yeah,
remote?
so I worked remote for a bit, and then we moved to Portland, partly because at the time they were still trying to figure out what their like remote policy was going to be, and so they were like, "Oh, maybe everybody has to move here by a certain date." And I was like, "Okay,
So
yeah,
weird.
cool." Like,
Yeah.
that's not open, but okay, let's go. And my partner really wanted to live in Portland. He
Oh,
loves Portland and had always wanted to live here. So I was like, "Cool, that's a weird
people love
confluence."
Portland.
Yeah,
I
it's
th- so I think some of you guys are pretty
unexpected.
weird personally, but hey, if you like Portland, it seems like you can go hiking and canoeing, and
It's a lot of fun.
people
Lots of
really,
outdoor stuff.
yeah. I don't love the outdoors that much. I should. I probably can use some sunlight and some trees and the skyscrapers. I get it. Yeah, I'm sure it's beautiful there.
It's lovely. So
Mhm.
yeah,
I'm going camping soon.
I am. So I'm embracing the outdoors. It's a lot of fun. So yeah, so that was kind of that. And then I took my job at Wieden. Was very much expecting to kind of like maybe not like it, and so was like
Yeah, you're a little
super.
traumatized after, the
Yeah,
pandemic,
yeah,
all the hustle and
yeah,
bustle, and
yeah,
it's a thing. It's
yeah,
hard.
yeah.
So you went in a little, and how did it turn out? I mean,
I
it,
think it went really well. I went in expecting to like I went in expecting like very different people to the ones that I met. I
mhm.
think I went in expecting like people to be, a lot more kind of snobby and lots of things. And yeah, I don't know. Like so far I've just met some really nice people. I think because they do this whole like authenticity stuff, like
Mhm.
people spend a lot more time just like being real about how they feel. So there's
Well,
just
hey,
like
after all, like some of your other experiences, like that seems like it's needed, right? Like it's definitely
yeah,
helpful. Like whether or not you
yeah,
buy into it and you're fully on board or sipping the
right.
Kool-Aid, like it's probably like a green flag.
Yeah, no, it felt nice to just like feel like, oh, these are just like
They're
cool
trying.
people who are like trying to be
Right.
honest about stuff.
Even that
Um,
attempt, the search and like striving for authenticity, making actual actions, I guess. Even the attempt, right? If that's a goal and they're doing some things, it's indicating a strong like shift and like they're actually trying, right?
yeah,
Because
yeah,
some companies don't even attempt that
no.
and they do neglect that. And then you do wind up in those awkward situations that are not right.
Mhm.
So,
So yeah, so I don't know. So that was uh heartening. And so yeah, so I just kind of was like, cool, well, this seems nice. And
and that's
yeah.
where you're at today. And that brings us full circle. And I want the last question, like maybe if you were to talk to yourself again and you're looking
Mm-hmm.
back at those down moments, whether that was when you were back home in Tennessee looking at portfolio schools and you're breaking into copywriting when you first discovered this, or it could be when you were having those struggling times at Goodby during the height of the pandemic. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know. What would you go back and tell yourself, knowing what you know now? What advice would you have? What would you tell yourself?
Um, I think the first thing that I would probably tell myself is it doesn't matter that I'm not good enough because I think I was like I was like the like imposter syndrome poster child.
Nice.
And I definitely, particularly when I got to Gabi, was very much like, oh no, I'm not as creative as these people. And was like super in my head about the fact that I'm not as creative as everybody. And I think every once in a while I get imposter syndrome now, but I think I have a very easy mechanism for getting out of it, which is just that, like, yeah, you're not good enough. Doesn't fucking matter. just doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. There are lots of terrible creatives that are much more successful than you. They make more money than you. There are lots of amazing creatives that are broke and don't have jobs. So like it's not relevant. You being good at this task is not relevant. You just doing the task is the relevant part. You
Yep.
get briefs. The brief is not be good. It's not be good enough to be doing this ad. It's do the ad.
Do the damn ad. Yeah.
Yeah, like make the ad and stop worrying about like being good enough to make the ad.
I like that. It's a great reminder.
Like, yeah. So I think like that was definitely something.
I mean, the imposter syndrome is like, well, whether it doesn't matter how you feel, you're there.
Yeah.
You have a job to do. Do it the best you can, and let's get to work. Like, I don't know.
Podcast. And so I think like definitely would have like have been helpful back then to know that. The other thing that I tell myself now if I feel bouts of imposter syndrome is just that like, girly, it's okay if you're not a good writer, and it's okay if you're not a good creative, because if you scammed your way to Wieden+Kennedy, which you are, my friend, is a very good scam artist.
That's
and
right. You did it.
That's wonderful. At a certain point, it really doesn't matter. If you're such a good scam artist that you scammed everyone into thinking that you were a great writer, then like it doesn't matter that you weren't a good writer. You're a great scam artist. You still have artist in the name. You are a wonderful scam artist. Just go forth and scam forth. Just scam.
What you doing?
Keep scamming. It's working. It doesn't matter. So I don't know. I think a blend of those two things probably would have been really helpful for me to know. And then I don't know, just to like keep going. I think I have always believed that I could figure this out, but there were definitely a lot of times where it was hard for me to like see that.
Yeah.
And I think I don't know. I think figuring out how to do it in a way that made sense for me just took a really, really long time. So I don't know. So I think I just probably be like, hey, you'll figure it out and it'll like totally be fine. And one day you'll wake up and you'll know how to write white, and you'll
it's so messed up.
Literally be so excited about it. Sometimes I hit the beats so right that I'm just like, oh my God, I did it. And I'm filled with joy. And that it could be fun once you figure it out. You know what I mean? Like this is me being like completely messed up. So like I'm canceled.
No.
But,
well, I do appreciate, your story is incredible. It's so inspiring. And I think all the lessons that we touched upon directly, I know you have many more pieces of advice that I would love for people to be able to reach out to you if it's possible. And what's the best way to do so for our listeners?
Probably just to email me directly, ShareinaChandler@gmail.com. No dots, no dashes. I'm the only one.
There it is. Well, then I'll leave it for them to connect and ask you more questions, because I'm sure they will. But I'm so grateful for your time and opening up. You really opened up, and I really appreciate your transparency. And hopefully there weren't too many lies in there. I don't think there were. But yeah, this was really, really special. This might be an instant classic episode. So thank you for your time and opening up.
Of course. Thank you for having me, and congrats on the podcast. Honestly, this type of consistency is hard to come by. It's hard. It's a hustle. It's hard.
I don't have a social life. My friends don't know me anymore, but that's okay.
Well, shout out to you. A labor of love that helps everyone. We love to see it.
I appreciate you. Thank you.
Bye.